Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Goring. I'm the President and CEO of the Mining Association of British Columbia, and I'm coming to you live from Oboy Studios on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. We're now in week 2 of celebrating Mining Month in British Columbia and MABC's 120th anniversary. Of course, mining has taken place in BC long before MABC came on the scene in 1901. Our industry's story is quite incredible when you consider how critical mining has been to building British Columbia. As a foundational industry, mining has literally built cities and towns in our province and shaped the map of BC. This evolution has been captured in photos and much later videos, and it's easy to see how much we've changed. History also shows the spirit and determination of miners to embrace innovation and to constantly search for better, faster, safer, more efficient ways to recover the metals and minerals society needs. Throughout Mining Month, we're putting a spotlight on innovation with a focus on how BC's mining companies are improving their ESG performance through innovation. Today's panel will take a deep dive into the E of ESG as they discuss environmental innovation and decarbonization in mining. Our members have some of the lowest GHG intensive mines and smelting operations in the world, thanks in part to our province's clean hydroelectric assets. Our operations are embracing innovation and clean technology and continue to make significant investments to reduce their carbon footprint while they prepare for the carbon neutral mine. We have a unique opportunity in BC to be the brand of choice in supplying the minerals and metals the world needs to transition to a cleaner, low carbon future. With that, I'd like to invite Matthew Quinlan, VP and CFO of Pretium Resources, the sponsor for today's panel, to make some introductory remarks on today's discussion. Mr. Quinlan has 25 years of experience in finance, capital markets, and the global mining industry. Most recently, he served as the interim CFO of Trevelet Mining, and prior thereto, as the CFO of Dominion Diamond Corporation, one of the world's largest diamond mining companies. Over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Mike. We're delighted to be an active member of the Mining Association of BC and a sponsor of Mining Month here in 2021. Our commitment to environmental protection is part of everything we do here at Pretium, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Sustainable resource development has been an integral part of how we've planned Bruce Jack, which is 65 kilometers north of Stewart, and right from the original planning through to operations. For example, we're connected to the provincial electricity grid that Mike referenced, so therefore providing clean renewable energy for our mine, for many aspects of our business. And we're building on that commitment with further decarbonization efforts and innovations. For example, we're going to be investing in a new fleet of battery-powered electric underground haul trucks, which are going to replace our diesel truck fleet, and that dramatically lowers our carbon footprint for the remaining aspects of our business. So in closing, I'd like to thank the Mining Association for putting today's event on, and it's trustworthy. It's going to be very, very topical. With that, back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Matthew. I'd now like to welcome Hayley Woodin, our esteemed moderator for today's panel. Hayley is the executive editor for business in Vancouver. She leads BIV's magazine portfolio and has contributed extensively to BIV's print and digital journalism as a reporter and editor since 2016. Hayley is the Western Canada contributor to BBC Radio's Business Matters program and currently chairs Kwantlen Polytechnic University's Journalism Program Advisory Committee. Hayley, over to you to guide us through today's conversation.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction and for the invitation to participate today. I'm also looking forward to today's discussion. As we know, climate change is an existential threat, and increasingly, we're seeing businesses, organizations, and institutions across virtually all sectors around the world increasingly factor the environment into the decisions they make, the investments they plan, and the strategies that they form. This is certainly true in mining, which of course has a very special relationship to the issue. It is mining, and Michael, as you mentioned, to some extent, BC mining, that is going to help power clean technologies and the tools used around the world to address the issue of climate change. Today, our conversation is going to focus on how the industry itself is addressing carbon emissions and reducing those emissions. Our panel of experts and leaders will walk through what needs to happen and what is already happening to get the industry to where it needs to be in line with carbon commitments. You're going to hear some of the innovations in practice and under development today. And let's not kid ourselves, we're also going to discuss some of the challenges ahead on the road to carbon neutrality and this concept of building and creating a carbon neutral mine. Allow me now to introduce our panelists. We're joined today by Hayley Woodin, Canada Research Chair in Advanced Mine Energy Systems and Assistant Professor at the University of British Columbia. We have Scott Maloney, Vice President Environment at Teck Resources, Patrick Marshall, Vice President Product Development at McLean Engineering, and Maren Smith, Executive Director at Clean Energy Canada. I'm going to take a moment to discuss how our discussion is going to flow today. We'll begin with some opening remarks from our panelists, followed by a greater in-depth discussion on our topic today. And of course, we'd like to hear from you, our audience members. If you have questions at any time, please make use of Slido. The tag, I believe, is Mining Month, and I'll keep an eye on those so we can try and get to as many audience questions as possible throughout our conversation today. Now, let's begin. There's no time to waste. Maren, I'm going to put you on the spot and start with you first. I'd love to hear from you. Give us some context. We know governments and companies around the world are focused on this issue, but I'd love to hear from you how you view the global mining industry as responding to this and what you're seeing and what maybe you'd like to see more of.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was just thinking about this morning and thought, remember back to Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister of the UK in 2019. Now, she wasn't there for a long time, but one of the things she did is she legislated in the UK that they would be carbon neutral. They would meet net zero by 2050. And she was really a leader in that. Now we have over 127 countries have committed to be net zero in just 2 years. So that is changing the landscape of where the world's going around clean energy and the economy. And it isn't just the countries that have committed to be net zero. Those countries combined have a GDP of $46 trillion. But it's the money that's going with it. So it's the investment corporations. So asset managers worth over $9 trillion have committed to be carbon neutral by 2050 or sooner. And we've also seen, along with commitments and money, we've seen industrial strategies that are clean industrial strategies from places like the UK, the EU, even the United States. So they're putting together the policies and the plans to shift their industries to be clean, low carbon, and decarbonized. One thing I just want to flag, my first message is really the world is moving quickly on this. You can see the indicators, and it's moving much faster than we're seeing here in Canada. We do have policies, the climate plan came out in December, budget 2021 had commitments, but it's moving faster than we're seeing here. And so the good news for Canada is, according to the World Bank, demand for minerals and metals is, we're moving into a super cycle. It's going to increase by over 500% for things like graphite, lithium, cobalt, even steel, copper, etc. These are going to increase by 30 to 50%. So this is going to be an opportunity for Canada. We have what the world wants. We could come out a winner from this transition. And not only do we have what the world wants, but we're well positioned with our clean electricity. Our grid right now is already 83% emission free. So when we plug it into industrial operations, they are very quickly low carbon. We've got a great clean tech sector and innovation sector here already that's creating new technologies to decarbonize. And like I said, we have the metals, minerals, and other things that the world wants. So huge opportunity for us. We're well positioned. And I'd say my third key message is that we need to move quickly. We can't sit back. We're seeing other countries put together strategies. And I'd say the opportunity, the way I want to frame it is, if I just take one more minute, is to talk about electric vehicles. We've seen this boom with all of the major car companies now coming online with electric vehicle models and committing to phase out the ICE engines, the fossil fuel fired engines by 2030, 2035. Countries are committing to that as well. And really the battery is the key component. It's the driver of an electric vehicle. And those batteries are going to become integral to the entire new energy system, whether it's transportation or whether it's the electricity grid, where you need batteries as part of the storage backup. Canada has all the metals and minerals that are required for those batteries. We've got the low carbon electricity. So we have a huge opportunity that didn't exist really before to become a leader and a supplier of batteries, this key component of the new engine. So again, for that, we can't just sit back. We have all the opportunities. We've got companies right now like Tesla. They're talking to Vale about getting nickel sulfite for their battery production. But we've got other companies, BMW, Apple, who are looking for low carbon metals and minerals. This is our opportunity. We aren't going to be able to compete on cost. Asia, Africa are going to be able to outcompete us on cost. Where we can compete is on low carbon and social responsibility. So we need to put in place the systems where we can actually signal to the world that this is where we're going, and that we are going to have verifiable systems so that we are a leader in low carbon and responsible metals and minerals to feed and be part of the demand that's growing there, create jobs and long-term prosperity for Canadians.
Thank you, Marin. And we're going to circle back a little later on to the topic of batteries. I know that's a focus at Clean Energy Canada, and it's certainly something we're going to look at in the context of mining as well, and this idea of electrifying fleets. Ali, I'll turn to you next. Why don't you provide some opening remarks for us on what you're seeing in terms of research and technological development in this area?
Sure. I'm not sure if you can hear me properly now. Sorry,
We can hear you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for mining, very good introduction from Marin. I think I can touch on some of the, I call them first challenges and at the same time opportunities that are lying ahead of us in mining. Mining, just like any of our industries, is very heavily carbon reliant at the moment. When we talk about mining, we need to understand that we're talking about a very diverse industry. We can't really look at one mine and then draw examples that we can basically apply to other mines. For example, an underground mine in a cold environment like Northwestern Territories might be totally different than a surface mine in British Columbia. A gold mine, a copper mine is different than a coal mining operation. But when we look at it, just like any of our industries, even transportation or any other activity that human activities that we have right now, we are relying on carbon to some extent very heavily. But there are good opportunities out there because, first of all, as was mentioned by Michael and then by Marin, Canada has a very clean grid electricity. So because of it's relying very heavily on hydro dams and hydropower, we have very good opportunity by electrification. So moving away from diesel equipment towards electric equipment provide us with the opportunity to cut off our in some of our operations by maybe 40-45% the existing carbon footprint of a mine is basically due to the diesel trucks and diesel equipment that we have in a mine. So these are all lowest hanging fruits that there's a lot of supply chain that has to happen before we get there, but there is a lot of hope that we can reduce carbon in our operations by fleet electrification at this moment. As for power, it is challenging for remote mines because they don't have access to that clean electricity, but renewables have been introduced to some of our mines. We have Rutland mine and Diavik mine before that. They are using wind power to offset some of their, right now, their 90%, 85% of their electricity is coming from diesel generators, but that 10 to 15% is a very good indication that renewables have a role to play. The challenge there would be how are we going to basically the generation of renewables, the cost effectiveness of it has raised a lot in the past years, but storage have been the challenge, the battery costs have been the challenge. They are reducing as well, but with hybridization and a proper design of energy systems, we can even reduce the cost there and arrive at a better penetration of renewables. There's also heat that is an important piece in many mines in Canada, especially in underground mining. And for that, thermal storage solutions can be helping us effectively. These are not a pie in the sky. If you look at some of the mines in Sudbury, Canada, they have been using this from the 60s and 70s. I can bring the example of Footstobie mine or even Creighton mine. That Creighton mine is still using its natural heat exchanger that is helping them to offset their heating costs, which is, if it wasn't because of that, it would be natural gas, which is basically a fossil fuel. So there are challenges, but also opportunities out there. So with that, I think we have a lot to do, and we have a lot of, and as Maren mentioned, we have a lot of homework to do. The learning curve, people, especially our competitors from Europe, China, and elsewhere, will not wait for us. We really have to adopt technologies as early as we can to stay competitive in this game. Otherwise, we will be hiring people to do it for us.
Thank you, Ali, for that perspective. And I'm liking the focus on the opportunities as well as the challenges. We'll keep that going throughout our conversation today. Patrick, let's turn to you next. Share with us perhaps some context to what you're seeing at the global level and maybe how different jurisdictions vary from your point of view.
Sure. So I come from an operations background primarily. I've worked open pit coal in Australia. I've worked underground hard rock gold in Canada, and most recently I've been working for McLean. So across my career, I've done operations, maintenance, and a lot of technology implementation. And at McLean, what we're doing is, we're Canada's largest manufacturer of underground mobile mining equipment. So in categories of bolting, shotcrete, secondary reduction, etc. We also developed the technology to support these assets in automation, digitalization, and electrification. So our primary market, about 80% of our market, is Canada, and we're expanding overseas. So I'll give some context for North America first. In 2015, we developed and deployed our battery electric drive system for our McLean vehicles. And now we have the largest fleet of battery mining vehicles deployed across North America, which includes 15 battery electric vehicles at the Borden mine in Ontario, which is quite a famous story. So in that adoption, it's been like a network effect where one mine starts with one vehicle, and the mine manager talks to another mine manager, and they buy a vehicle while the first mine increases its fleet. So as the community of electrification grows, more people get brought into the fold with knowledge of designing for electrification, maintaining electric vehicles, operating electric vehicles. It's really started to explode. From my perspective, certainly in Canada, the adoption of electric vehicles for underground mining is going exponential. And the other major mining markets like Australia, Africa, Latin America are starting to take notice, and they're building their consortiums, their knowledge to start integrating battery electric vehicles as well. I think that the technology is already cost competitive against diesel in just a head-to-head comparison for our vehicles. But going to battery electric vehicles just creates this additional value offering. It provides a cleaner, healthier work environment. You eliminate heat generation, you eliminate vibrations, you have such a quiet operation, and there's no diesel exhaust in this captive environment. You get higher performance out of the vehicles. we see 50% increased average speeds, greater acceleration, greater torque, and it's an enabler for greater energy efficiency throughout the entire operation. So you're using less energy to move the vehicle, of course, but you realize energy efficiency in your ventilation strategies. That in turn flows onto your heating or cooling strategies for your airflow, and you bring down your total carbon content to do the amount of work. So I believe that the technology can be scaled up to an extent to function in open pit mining, and really the electrification of diesel equipment is going to be viable for the entire mining industry this decade, with some caveats on that. I think open pit mining also needs to adapt and change to adopt electrification. However, the numbers for electrification of, the numbers for show that electrification of mining fleets certainly isn't sufficient to decarbonize and mitigate the severe impacts of climate change. You're only tackling your Scope 1 emissions there. So there's really lots of work required and lots of opportunities in operational energy efficiency. That's the stuff that Ali was talking about. Power generation, and something that I'm really excited about is the carbon-free mineral processing and smelting. When you compare underground mining and open pit mining, their Scope 1 and 2, the open pit mining is about double the intensity in a lot of commodities. But when you include Scope 3, the balance actually shifts of the carbon intensity of the process, because for underground mining, you use a large amount of steel and a large amount of cement in the ground support strategy for an underground mine. So those really start to notch up the Scope 3 emissions. So I really strongly believe that targeting Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions needs to happen this decade as well. I'm an advisor to an organization called the Net Zero Company. They're focused on helping the mining industry specifically address climate change and align their ESG strategy with the expectations of both society and financial markets, as Maren indicated, is really driving some change as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Certainly exciting, perhaps a bit daunting, but I think really exciting to just think about the amount of change and what's going to become possible over the next decade alone, let alone what's going to become possible through to 2050. Scott, it's your turn. And as a mining executive at a company that is figuring this out, that has its own roadmap ahead to try and get to a 2050 neutrality commitment, tell us what you're seeing, what you're dealing with, and your perspective on the issue of reducing emissions in mining.
Of course. Thanks, Hayley. I mean, as people have mentioned, there's two really exciting things that are happening at the moment. One is around the ability for the mining industry to support a low carbon economy globally. And the second is a part around decarbonisation, of course. And Teck's very proud to be among one of the world's lowest carbon intensity producers of copper, zinc and steelmaking coal. And as people have mentioned, that's in part due to the low carbon electricity we use in British Columbia, but also in Chile, where solar power is very available and inexpensive. And really we're seeing an accelerated need for essential metals and minerals for a low carbon world at the moment. Increased demand for copper to support renewable power and electrification, zinc for galvanizing of steel for batteries, renewables and other infrastructure. And Teck sees significant value potential for our business from a portfolio of green metals. And one of the things that we are doing is doubling our production of copper by 2023 through our Quebrada Blanca 2 project in Chile. And in addition to supplying those metals and minerals for a low carbon world, new technologies really are changing the mining industry and setting us up for that path towards decarbonisation. And as mentioned, like many others, both industry players and nations, we've set a goal to be a carbon neutral operator by 2050. And on top of that, some shorter term goals as well. Reduce the carbon intensity of our operations by 33% by 2030. Procure 100% of our electricity demands in Chile from clean energy by 2030. and to accelerate the adoption of zero-emission alternatives for transportation. And as others have mentioned, the low-carbon electricity in BC, and for us in Chile as well, is a tremendous advantage and something that we're capitalising on. The mobile equipment, our haul trucks, is the biggest source of emissions that we're pursuing from a decarbonisation perspective to start with. The most immediate challenge that we have is, unlike smaller underground haul trucks, battery electric haul trucks aren't yet available at the scale we need for surface mining. However, the progress is really promising, and the manufacturers are showing a path to this over the next 5 to 10 years. With our peers in the International Council on Mining and Metals, we're working directly with the original equipment manufacturers to really give them a strong signal that if those trucks are built, that we will buy them, and working on what the technology barriers are to allow those to be developed and brought to market. What that will require, of course, though, is more electricity, and in the order of 5 to 10 times increase in electricity demand. And of course, the energy supply chain becomes critical, and working with the province and the energy supply companies to signal the need for that infrastructure and to support how we can get that rolled out is just critical.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about some of the milestones that Teck has achieved to date on that path to 2050. We'll circle back to that. Maren, I want to talk about the opportunity you mentioned. It sounds like there's a bit of a sense of urgency, but you've outlined what is really an exciting opportunity. But I'd like to ask you to what extent you think the mining industry globally is stepping up today. How much more would you like to see the industry do in the years and decades ahead?
Yeah, on the battery opportunity?
Sure, on batteries or more broadly as well, focusing on just reducing emissions.
Sure. So, following on some of the things Scott just said, it is great for the mining sector to be signaling to the OEMs who are making that equipment that this is a top priority for them. Because it's a bit of this chicken and an egg. The demand needs to be there for people to be investing in the technologies and creating these. So that's one key piece. Secondly, I just want to reinforce what Scott said, which is we need to ensure that the utilities are creating the clean electricity that's going to be needed to power all of that. So this is a top priority, and I feel that here in BC, I'm not sure that the province and the BC Hydro are really connecting the dots between the increased demand from electrification of transportation, and if we're shifting to electrification of home heating and cooling, and then we're adding on the industrial load and the industrial transportation. So we just need to make sure that those signals are going from the mining sector and others to be very clear. We are committing to be net zero, and that is that we want to be there to be using this demand. So that's another key piece. And then for the mining sector as a whole, I do, just to repeat around our competitive advantage is really being the socially responsible, environmental, and low carbon supplier of metals and minerals. That's going to be a key niche that British Columbia and Canada as a whole can tie into. And so I actually feel like we have yet to really have a clear verification process. So I know that right now in the EU, for example, they've developed a battery alliance. We can chat more about that later if you want, but that's brought together the whole supply chain for batteries, including the mining and mineral sector. And then they've created a verification scheme, a certification scheme, so that they can certify that their batteries are sustainable, environmental, low carbon, socially responsible. And Canada is going to need to do something similar. We have this huge opportunity with North America, the North American integrated auto market. And so the battery demand there is going to be huge. But that's what's going to put us a cut ahead of others. So those would be some of the key things that I think the mining sector is going to need to focus on. And as is being said here today, there's lots of great opportunity if we choose to do it.
I'd like to dig in a little bit into this idea of who might be leading the way at this point in time. Patrick, you mentioned the famous Borden story, and I'm curious if you have other examples of ways in which the Canadian industry might already be a leader.
Yeah, so Borden really took the spotlight with their electric fleet, but I think it's funny that Marin spoke about signals to the market, because when we designed our first battery electric vehicle in 2015, we didn't necessarily have the signal yet. In fact, Don McLean, the founder, asked engineering to scope what it would take to build a battery electric vehicle. They presented to the executive of the company at the time. My predecessor, he stood up and said, "Don, this is very ambitious, but we can't do this. I can't support it." And Don turned around and said, "Well, it's my company and my money, so we're going to do it." So it was a big leap of faith to go into this, but what validated it for us was in the following year, the market did start to send the signals, and it was coming from the Sudbury camp. They've been I would call Canada a leader in the electrification space for mining. There's a lot of small companies here that are producing support technologies in charging batteries, battery integration into vehicles, and full battery electric vehicle design and manufacturing. The Sudbury camp of Glencore and Vale were instrumental in sending those market signals. They put a stake in the ground and said, our next expansions are going to be exclusively battery electric operations. These are not economic in a diesel mine. We cannot run these properties. So from that, it was the motivation, the incentive that we need, and it spurred a collective there in the spoke wheel around Sudbury, where you have companies like McLean, Miller, Covaterra, Meditech, producing products, electrification products that are getting tested alongside products by Sandvik, Caterpillar, Epiroc at these mines. I think it was their transparency with their ambition, the sharing of their studies, and really clearly articulating the value drivers for them, and what they did in collaboration. They were certainly early drivers in the movement to develop standards, develop battery safety, and they have come through with commitment to actually receiving products, testing it, and their mines go into production next year. So in the last 2 months, I've quoted out to the market battery vehicles that would double our existing fleet out there in North America. It's really going exponential. And some of the other spin-offs from that are training and skills development in Sudbury. They've partnered with College Boreal and Cambrian College to train the future of electrical battery electric maintenance technicians. There's battery testing happening with NRC Canada at the facilities. It's really a ground zero.
That's really exciting to hear. Scott, this might be a good time to go to you and hear about some of the achievements Teck has experienced in trying to bring about or implement new technologies and new ways of doing things on that path to 2050.
Sure, thanks, Hayley. And certainly one of the immediate things has been the solar power work we've done in Chile. At one of our mines in Chile, Carmen de Andacollo, we've now put in place an agreement which will supply 100% renewable energy to the mine through a solar array, and already have an agreement in place for 50% of the operating power for Quebrada Blanca 2, our other big development in Chile, to be powered by renewable. Closer to home in BC, and picking up the themes we've talked about before, we've actually done a small but super exciting pilot of electric crew buses. So rather than having a diesel transport bus, we've put on the ground over the last year 2 electric transport buses, and they are fitted with lithium-ion batteries, which give them a range of up to 200 kilometers on a single charge. And what's exciting about that is it allows us to understand how to use them, get the operators used to using electrical vehicles, and in particular, get some of the benefits that were mentioned before around the vehicles being quieter and not having the same exhaust fumes. So that's been really successful. We've been really pleased with the results of that, and we're at the moment ordering 4 more buses. At Highland Valley Copper, also in British Columbia, we're organising for a trial of a truck to haul copper concentrate using a battery electric truck. And again, that'll help us to understand the technology, help us to understand how the battery electric system works, help us train the drivers around how to use the downhill for regeneration of power, and again, help us to really set ourselves up for when we can more broadly deploy larger tonnage surface mobile equipment.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. We've had the topic of batteries mentioned several times, and I'm keeping an eye on the questions from the audience, and electric vehicles is certainly a theme in the questions coming in. So Ali, maybe you can start us off on this conversation with some insight into some of the latest innovations around batteries and perhaps other clean energy solutions.
Sure. Yes, it's certainly a very interesting subject. I would like to put it under the bigger umbrella of fleet electrification. And again, because mining is such a diverse industry, it doesn't necessarily mean that battery electric vehicles are your only solution. In fact, battery electric fleet is a necessity in many operations, and they work very nicely, for example, for underground mines and so on and so forth. But there are some other technologies that we can use, if possible, in some of our operations, and they are very high in terms of technology readiness level. In fact, they are already off the shelf, ready to be delivered. For example, there are some mining operations that for a flat haulage, but a very long distance haulage, they can switch to something like railware, and it has been implemented, and it has had very good results. So that is an electric, basically, means of materials handling that would offset your diesel, but it's not necessarily a battery electric vehicle. Or in surface mining, for example, when the tonnage is very high, so on and so forth, there are some companies that are working on hydrogen electric trucks. So I would say, in the end, what I see happening is we will have a mosaic of integrated solutions, and every mining company and every mining operation has to look at different corners and different linkages of their process and try to decarbonize. You might decarbonize the fleet totally, but you might have a smelter that is using, for example, in the case of the steel industry, using a lot of carbon for its process. So what are you going to do with that? Or you might, as Patrick mentioned, you might have an underground mine that is totally 100% diesel free, but the cement that you put in your backfill might have a very large carbon footprint. So depending on the scope that you want to engage with, and also the type of mine, is it a hard rock mine, underground mine, surface mine, are you grid connected, so on and so forth, you might seek different technologies. Now, for battery electric versus hydrogen, there is a lot that has happened in the past 5 years, and there is a lot that is happening in the past 2 years. I was fortunate that I visited most of the OEMs in Europe. They are working on battery electric fleet. For example, if you go to Boliden mine, they already have a fleet of trolley assist. These are hybrid trucks. They kind of coming in a midway solution till we have a full supply chain of battery electric and maybe even hydrogen trucks. There are some other companies that are working on very large size hydrogen trucks. These are either fuel cell. Basically, you need to have hydrogen as your fuel. That brings a lot of challenges and opportunities at the same time. But looking at it from the perspective of mining operations, and especially regulations and legislation and legislative restrictions that we have, I think at the moment, battery electric is a very good solution for underground mines, and we have a lot of them, especially in East Coast. For surface mines, we are still looking at different technologies that are being developed and are coming down the pipe, but there are some good showings that a hybrid solution can work. Well, at the moment, nobody knows really what is going to dominate the market, but I think in the end, when I look at it from my own perspective, I think we will have an array of solutions, and it will not be a single solution that works for every mine.
Interesting. Patrick, can you maybe explore with us some of the gaps that exist in powering batteries for mining, and any thoughts on how we might address those gaps?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I think the underground mining space is ripe already for electrification, but there's definitely gaps as you go bigger. Technically, we're not going to see 400-ton trucks that are powered purely by batteries. It's too challenging to repower that battery as you draw it down in a manner that's time efficient. But I think that when you couple electrification with other technologies, similar to Ali's theme, open pit mining can explore ways of being electrified with smaller haul trucks that are automated. So I would rather run 40 100-ton battery trucks than 10 400 trucks. It's feasible. Once you add automation to this problem, it decouples your head count from your fleet count, and you start to realize some fantastic operating cost improvements once you take labor out of the equation for per vehicle, because you have smaller tires, smaller castings, smaller parts. The vehicles are easier to transport. A 400-ton truck will block both lanes of a highway and need a police escort wherever you've got to move it. They're just not viable for a low carbon mining economy. I think the next stage, the next wave of technology to support batteries in mining is the electric fleet management. So it'll be the software to optimize your productivity of your vehicles, your charging, and your grid. So basically your power distribution and transmission planning to most benefit from your electric fleet. Lastly, I think the hydrogen story is going to be a really important component. It's what it is essentially, from my perspective, is it's just a alternative storage mechanism in an electric system. So when you need to go to larger quantities of energy storage, hydrogen will probably be the answer for vehicles and renewable energy power generation and storage.
This is a good time, I think, to share one of the questions from our audience. Louise asks, when do we expect to see those big haul trucks at the mine site go electric or hybrid electric? Patrick, I think you touched on this a little bit about that 10-year horizon, but maybe you can elaborate.
Sure. I think that hybrid is doable with the overhead trolley, the catenary style electrification. Perhaps we do develop hydrogen powered trucks for trucks in those 200 to 400 ton size classes, but it's on the longer end of the technology curve to implement in these trucks, whereas I think the technology readiness of automation in whole circuits in a lot of mining jurisdictions has been developed, and the technology is moving very quickly to adapt it for more challenging conditions where there's regular rainfall or snowfall. And I really strongly believe that electric automated smaller haulage is the long-term solution for most applications. And then you look at other solutions, like when you put a cost of carbon on things, those projects like in-pit crushing and rope conveyors, which have been studied many, many times and just never quite made the return on investment. When you layer in a cost of carbon against the big diesel trucks, these alternative means of material movement may also be on the table for your project.
Thank you. And thank you, Louise, for the question. Maren, I'd like to circle back to something you mentioned, and that's the opportunity for building up Canada's capacity to maybe address electrification. What can you tell us about, first, why having a Canadian battery supply chain is important, and also maybe elaborate further on the opportunity?
Yeah, sure. So why it's important is that, as I've mentioned, there's this fast transition. I mean, it's going to take time, but we're seeing the electric transportation transition really accelerate. So just to put that in perspective, last year in 2020, BC was thinking they would be selling about 3% electric vehicles. It was 10%. During the COVID crisis in the European Union, their electric vehicle sales went up 137%. Not in Canada, but in most of the rest of the world, EV sales were increasing throughout the pandemic. And, great to hear about the buses that people are using in some of their mining operations. Toronto Transit announced a month or so ago that they'll be buying 300 electric buses. Like 2 years ago, would anybody have thought that that was going to be an announcement out of Toronto Transit? So these technologies are coming online quickly. It's projected to be about $100 billion industry, the lithium-ion battery industry, by 2030. And as I've said, this is going to take a lot of metals and minerals, and Canada has them. So why do we want to not just export our metals and minerals to others and have them sell us back batteries? Is that really the battery is the most expensive part of the electric vehicle, and it's really going to be the powerhouse and the driver. I've actually become quite excited about batteries over the last few months, just recognizing how this could really be a piece, as we're shifting off of oil and gas, what's going to happen to that, hold in Canada's economy that it's there right now. And the battery piece is actually an opportunity for us to ensure that the jobs continue. And it's really across the whole economy we could do this. So about a month ago, we brought together people from the mining sector. The Mining Association of Canada attended, people in the battery manufacturing business, because we do have that, as well as great R&D here in Canada, up to the auto sector, General Motors, and the recyclers. And so there's a real interest in having the full supply chain get enhanced here in Canada so that we can be not vulnerable, selling our metals and minerals and having to be depending on other people. We've seen during COVID that supply chain is an issue, so we don't want to be vulnerable. We also want to take advantage of this opportunity to create jobs in what's going to be a big growing sector. And I saw on the slide one of the questions about why aren't we doing this? It's a good question because it's really this once in a lifetime opportunity. That was kind of the phrase that this group that we brought together for a 2-day dialogue kept saying. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We've got the clean electricity to build these. We've got good R&D. We've got the metals and minerals here. So how are we going to bring it all together? Government has identified this as an opportunity. Next steps, I think, are there needs to be enhanced collaboration, and we need to create an alliance that includes the mining sector and those others, create an alliance here in Canada to get the government moving, create the roadmap and the action plan to get it off the ground. So it's, I'd say, exciting opportunity for everybody who's in this room, who's in the mining sector, and who's part of building those battery-powered vehicles. And I will say, as Ali said, hydrogen is going to be a solution for some of the medium and heavy-duty trucks and vehicles. It's not going to all be battery-powered. And so that's a part of the answer is hydrogen or battery-powered trucks for the mining sector. But part of the opportunity is just the mining sector plugging all their metals and minerals into this growing, emerging battery economy.
Yeah,
And you
it creates a
mentioned
chance
that
for
question, yeah.
circular
Go ahead.
economy. I was just going to say it creates the chance for a circular economy. As a manufacturer, we are competing with bus manufacturers for supply of batteries, and lead times on supply are out beyond 6 months and growing. And there is a race to secure battery supply across all modes of transportation. So having, I think that the health pandemic really exposed some of the weaknesses of globalization, and being more capable within our own economy, within our domestic economy, would be a nice thing to see.
Thanks for that. Scott, I want to take the opportunity to ask you a bit about what Teck thinks on this issue of electricity or electrification versus hydrogen, and maybe it would be useful to share for our audience some of the things you're thinking through along those lines in that area.
Sure, and great question. And there's obviously pros and cons of each technology across our different mine sites as well. So for our remote sites, for example, we have a zinc mine in Alaska, but for remote sites like in Alaska or in northern BC, perhaps hydrogen has some potential because the electrification is not as easy. I mean, at a very general sense, the advantages of hydrogen or fuel cells are really their extended range and their quicker refuel times. Battery electric is perhaps more immediately available and doesn't have some of the safety risks that need to be dealt with hydrogen that's stored on an actual truck. But certainly we've got an open mind to both. I think in BC, given the low carbon electricity that we do have, that would certainly it does certainly mean that we're considering battery electric as our first preference, but a lot of things to work through in terms of the pros and cons of both. We're following closely an example that Anglo American has. They've got a truck that they're trialing in South Africa, 291 tons, so a relatively large truck, which has fuel cells and a battery. So certainly keen to see what they learn from that trial in South Africa over the next year or so.
Excellent. One of our top questions here from Matt, he asks, are there any studies or conversions being had around using green hydrogen to power haul trucks as opposed to EV trucks? Ali, maybe that's something you can tackle. And then Patrick, weigh in for sure if you have additional insight.
Yeah, that's the well. If Matt is interested, he can follow my own publications. One of them is even in an open access journal, so it's available for everybody to download. There is a lot of it going specific to mining. There's a bit less, but for general green hydrogen and subjects around hydrogen being used as a storage medium for power generation and also for transportation, so on and so forth. There's a lot. For mining, there is less work and studies done, but there is some good content. Well, if I wanted to give you the upshot of that is hydrogen is a very good means for storing, especially when the size of the storage is very large. The reason is for batteries, you have to really implement more and more battery units to increase the size of the hydrogen system. The problem is when it's very large, it gets somewhat for power generation and storage cost cost would go very high and it would not be feasible. But for hydrogen, the size of your electrolysis and generation would stay the same. You just have to increase the size of your storage, which is basically the hydrogen storage tanks. That is a good advantage. And also you can use the hydrogen directly in your equipment, and the refueling times are less. However, the disadvantage is when you use it on a truck, you have a fuel cell that is using it, and that fuel cell is not as efficiently giving you electricity as compared to a battery. So you're losing a little bit on the overall cycle efficiency, but you have that advantage of having a very large size storage. And that is where it gets really interesting, because you have to look at the whole mining process. And that's where, for larger and especially surface operations, hydrogen might make more sense. And for underground operations, battery electric might make sense, which goes very well with the regulations that we have, because underground use of hydrogen underground is a bit challenging right now because of the regulations that we have in Canada. So it is basically the science, the physics, and the regulations, they kind of are pushing towards use of battery electric in underground mines, and surface mines are mostly inclined towards using maybe larger hydrogen trucks, or switch to something like a trolley assist, a hybrid solution. I would like to add to what Scott mentioned, that there are big players out there and like BHP and Anglo America that are looking at hydrogen technology very seriously. And I think with them paving the way basically for this technology to be developed, I think other players in this game will also follow. Right now, the technology readiness level of battery electric fleet is certainly higher than the technology readiness level of hydrogen fleet. But who knows what happens in 5 or 10 years with billions of dollars of investment.
Thank you for that
Yeah,
overview.
I agree
Patrick?
completely with Ali. I think the exciting part of hydrogen is storage for renewable power generation. The mining is generally in remote locations. It's not so often that it's conveniently connected to grid power. So a lot of self-generation happens, burning large diesel generators. I think in parts of the world where it's possible, solar is going to be the primary power generation, and storage for overnight operations is going to be with hydrogen. It's the more exciting thing for me than hydrogen trucks is the energy power generation with hydrogen as storage.
A good follow-up question from a conversation we were having the other day, Patrick, in our prep call, where you mentioned that commodities might be classified differently based on the carbon that goes into producing them. We have a question here from Amy, who asks, could we see the day when low carbon metals fetch a premium in the market? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's already been demonstrated in different examples, but it's created the precedent for it. So Barrick marketed and sold green gold where it had been produced without cyanide, and they were able to attract a premium for the sale of that gold. There's a commodities exchange being established in Singapore for the transaction of green natural gas, where the natural gas will have the carbon credits for the consumption of that gas tagged to the sale already to make it carbon neutral. Mr. Friedland at Ivanhoe Mines, chair of Ivanhoe Mines, recently announced his intent to be the net zero carbon producer with his Kamoa-Kakula mine. And he also indicated that once you differentiate a commodity by it having no carbon in its production, it is worth a premium. He's proposing that a ledger process, something like a blockchain, be tagged to the commodities on the exchange to register all the metrics around the source of that commodity and its carbon neutrality, hopefully, or perhaps even carbon negative production of materials. And in terms of the rebuttal I've heard from some miners has been, well, you always need coal to make steel, but it's just not true. With electric arc furnaces and recycled steel, you can produce carbon-free steel from renewable energy sources, and companies like SASB are scaling from test bench level production of steel using processes with hydrogen gas to strip the oxides off. So every metallurgical process, I think, can be rethought to be carbon-free in the production of the commodity. And when we get to that, we have a reason to market and sell those for a premium.
Yeah, and if I can just add there on what Patrick said, which I agree with, is we have seen companies like Tesla, like BMW, and as I said, Apple, who are coming forward. So I'm not sure they're paying a premium right now, but you're getting preferential access. You have a clear market. And I actually think that it won't be too long before having a high carbon product will be a barrier to get into the market. So that's really that context of everyone committing to net zero is so critical. And just to put one thing in perspective, this was just a very back of the envelope calculation that one of my teammates did here at Clean Energy Canada. But the mining, one of those haul trucks, those big tech haul trucks, we were actually looking at what are the emissions from it. And actually one tech haul truck, if we can get it shifted to battery electric or hydrogen to a zero carbon technology, it's the equivalent of changing the entire Regina transit fleet. So that's how important finding these solutions are for the mining sector, is that there's really such an emissions profile because the trucks are running 24/7 often, or at least running very long hours. So that's one of the keen interest groups like mine have in terms of finding solutions and making sure that there is enough power and that those solutions get adopted.
Thanks for that, Maren. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time, so I want to offer a final closing question to our panelists today. From each of your perspectives, what's one thing you want our audience to take away today, be it focusing on an opportunity, planning to address a challenge? How can they broach the issue of thinking about the environment and emissions reductions in mining? What's your advice for them? Scott, why don't we start with you?
Well, my piece of advice would be to be super excited about the opportunity we have in BC with our low power grid. Lots of technologies coming online and our ability to be a really key player in terms of providing essential metals for a low carbon world.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ali, what about you? What's something that mining executives or those in the industry should be considering moving forward?
Sure. Maybe my suggestion is, let's not forget, because of the diversity of mining, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It will be an array of solutions. And also, it will not happen overnight. It will need long-term and continuous progress and commitment from both the industry and the government and the society, because these are technologies that are, in terms of cost only, they need support to be cost effective. As for now, so that if that support vanishes, we're back to using diesel everywhere.
An important thing to consider. Patrick, how about you? A piece of advice or a consideration?
I think I've covered the technology side extensively today. So my piece would be pay attention to the financial markets. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, largest assets under management of any institutional investment group, said in 2020, climate risk is investment risk. And you now have a investor class coming into their peak earning years that are much more aware of climate change. They are making decisions based on more than just money. They're active investors in that sense. So as the executives of mining companies, you do need to pay attention to your ESG scores. You're going to benefit from fund flows. You're going to attract a share price premium of your peers, potentially, and ultimately realize a lower cost of capital, while your laggards will have a higher cost of capital, a lower share price, and they'll also be receiving a drag of carbon taxes on their balance sheet. So I think the financials for acting, it's really ambitious to get to net zero by 2050. This decade defines the century, and the financials tell us to act now. So That's my advice.
I like that. This decade defines the century. It's a good thing to remember. And Maren, final word to you, a consideration or piece of advice.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I agree. I would look at this moment as a real exciting opportunity. Change can be seen as like a drag and something that it takes a lot of work and effort, but there's so much opportunity here. And key is that this is a sprint and a marathon. I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen now. And I really feel like people should not expect that the government's going to kind of solve this and plug you into the electricity you need and figure out the hydrogen piece. It is a sprint to get this stuff off the ground, and it's going to be a long transition. And that's both on, decarbonizing, electrifying your mines, but also taking advantage of this huge opportunity around batteries and ensuring that we actually have the whole supply chain here in Canada, that we reap the benefits of that, and that there's going to be the supply needed over the long term. So learning the lessons of COVID and gearing up for a sprint and a marathon, because we're going to be doing both on this one.
Well said. To our panelists, Maren, Ali, Scott, Patrick, thank you so much for your time and insight today. Really appreciate what you had to say and you spending part of your day with us. On this note, I'm going to hand it on back to Michael and Matthew.
Thanks very much. That was a great panel. Lots to dig into there. As the President and CEO of the Mining Association, I'm very proud of the response that our members are executing with respect to climate change. And our members have been carbonizing for some time. As Matthew mentioned earlier, Pretium's Bruce Jack mine is now changing out their diesel haul truck fleet and moving into a battery electric vehicle situation. Our member Copper Mountain, their mine in Princeton, they're working with Komatsu to put in a system where their very large haul trucks would be hooked up just like a bus in the city to overhead electric lines. And that will reduce GHGs significantly. So there's a number of things happening where our members are focused on reducing their impact and reducing their GHGs. Every morning in this province, thousands of British Columbians wake up and go to work in the mining industry thinking how they can innovate, make change, and do things better. So today, our industry is poised as a leading global supplier of responsibly produced low-carbon minerals and metals. In fact, I think it's important for British Columbians to know that the amount of CO2 emissions avoided through the production and export of our responsibly produced copper, aluminum, and steelmaking coal is equivalent to reducing the GHG emissions of approximately 1.6 million passenger vehicles annually, which is quite astounding. And as the panel discussed today, we'll continue to employ innovation and technology to find new ways to reduce our carbon footprint while we produce the minerals and metals the world needs to meet our Paris Agreement targets. So thank you again to everyone who's joined us for today's panel. And I'd like to give a special thank you to Hayley, Maren, Ali, Scott, and Patrick for your participation. As a thank you to each of our speakers, a donation has been made to Mining for Miracles to raise funds for the Cellular and Regenerative Medicine Center at BC Children's Hospital. The center is the cause that's being supported this year by the Pie Throw event, and you can visit miningformiracles.ca for more information. Next week is our panel, final panel for Mining Month, where our topic will be Indigenous Peoples in Mining. I look forward to seeing you all there, and thank you very much for tuning in today.